Hey there, my name is Jen Rudd with Grow with Jen Inc. I am a business consultant that helps businesses scale while reducing human capital and leveraging automation. Today, we're going to be reviewing the basics of one of my favorite SaaS tools, Airtable. Today, we'll be talking about reviewing how views work, some of the basics in structuring and setting up your views, how to view your data in Airtable, and going over some of the fields and how they're used in your Airtable database. Now let's talk first about what a database is. Databases are important because you want to store your information in a streamlined manner that can be accessed and actioned upon in your business. Airtable is a great place to keep your data, but it also has the ability to action upon your data, which helps you streamline your processes. Since this is a database, it's important that you store your data in an orderly fashion. This is why we have specific field types. It helps you organize, sort, and run automation carefully off of carefully structured and organized information. So first, let's go over some of the field types. When you log into your Airtable database and click onto the tiles, you'll be brought into one of these screens. It'll be either a grid or a form, calendar, so you'll have different views that you land into as well as tables. But the data inside them are structured into fields. If you look at these fields, for the example, this key field, the first field in your table is I have it set up as a formula field, but it's the first field. This is your identifier for this unique piece of information in Airtable. I tend to structure my tables as formulas as the key field, meaning it's a combination of other data in the table or it's a unique identifier. You'll also see that you can have a single line text, long text for paragraphs, dates, phone numbers, emails, and so forth. You will see that this first key field, you only have a certain number of choices. This is because when you're structuring your data, you want to make sure that you're not putting too much information or a type of field that doesn't really work. So for example, you wouldn't use a single select or multi-select in your key field, and it's not an option in Airtable for data structuring. Here we have a single select field, which means that I have a certain specific number of choices that someone can select, and they can only choose one of those items. This is great for helping you force people to make decisions. So for example, this is a lead tracking database. I want to know why I have this lead, if they're looking for more information about working with me, if they need information on pricing, allows me to see if they're a press inquiry or referral or so forth. But it's basically when somebody is interacting with this data, you are telling them how you want this field to be entered by reducing the amount of manual entry that they can put into this field. So single selects are great for statuses, workflows, or for understanding specifics about this record. Here you will see that you have a long text field, which means that you have the ability to add paragraphs of data without running out of space, or making sure that you can have a wrapped field if the field is long enough. So here you can also turn on rich text, which means that you can add things like hyperlinks, paragraph formatting, things like that. So we're changing this long text field into a rich text field. And when you start to type, you will see the formatting options. You can make a paragraph, quotes, a code block, headings, even checklists. So I know when people are moving over from Trello, they like to have checklists. This is a great place to put that information. And with automations, you can automatically populate a field with checklists. We'll talk about that in another video, but just trying to show you some of the ideas of how you can structure your data and how you can use the different fields. So if you are used to using a checklist somewhere, a long text field with rich text formatting is a great option. Next, we have another single select field. When you have workflows where your records, your people, your things, your inventory follows a set general linear workflow, statuses are great, and they would be single selects. If a record can live in multiple statuses or multiple kind of flows at the same time, you might use multi-selects, but I find that having a linear single select helps you kind of keep things in a linear fashion and reduces the different combinations of statuses somebody can be in. Here we have a last modified time. So within the metadata, within the underlying information in Airtable, you can check the created time and the last modified time, as well as who touched the file and who created the file. So if you're using an outside tool like Zapier, the created by is usually the person that set up the Zap, the person who's connected to your outside software, that their login is used to create these records. So therefore, the created by would be whoever connected those two pieces of the two softwares. Otherwise, if you're creating a new record from scratch within the base, it would be whoever is logged in at the time. Airtable does track different users, so it's really helpful, especially if you have a large team or you have multiple people touching information, that you have a login for each person so that you know who touched what. And Airtable is tracking that information by using those created by and last modified fields. But the created time and last modified time are time and date stamps, and they do reflect the time format that you select in that field. So every time you're trying to set up formatting, make sure that you're setting it up for each field. It isn't global yet. Here I have local. I'm an EST time zone. And then I also ask for a time field, and I have it in 12-hour format. So the times that reflect here are in Eastern Standard Time. But you can turn off the date and timestamps. Also, I'm using this last modified time to track a specific field or fields, meaning that I only want to know when the status changed. I only want to know when this field changed. Another way that I like to track is the note section. If somebody is updating the note section, I want a time and date stamp on that as well. Here we have some short text fields. There's a single line. The email addresses. This is formatted so only email addresses will show up. It will give you, if you just start typing gobbledygook, it will let you put the information in there. But if you are trying to use automation and you have an email address that's not a full email address, the automation will fail. So it's important that when you're using these structured fields that you're actually completing, making sure that you're putting the full format in, things like that. Here we have a phone number fields, which is set up for it's set up for US-ish phones, and it's not necessarily, again, forcing you to put in a full number. It will take smaller iterations of that number. And then again, we have some assigned to. If you have multiple collaborators, you could put them in here as well. And then here is a linked field. We'll go over that in a little bit more depth in a few minutes. And then here we have some currency fields. You can set the currency symbol and how precise you want those numbers. Let's go ahead and add some other fields. So we went over single line, long text, attachments. You can add attachments. You can upload files into Airtable, and they are saved on the Airtable cloud servers. There is limits to how much you can add into Airtable, so do keep that in mind. While it is a database, it's not really meant for data asset management, meaning that you're not going to want to put as much information as possible into your bases. A better practice would be having a storage like a Dropbox or a Google Drive, things like that, to actually store your files and reflect back to them using the link into a Google Drive folder, for example, so that you can find them, but you wouldn't put as much. You would try to reduce the amount of attachments. Also, if you're having records that need different types of attachments, instead of using like a global attachments, you would have a field for each attachment type. So for example, if you're tracking clients and you need schematics, you would have schematics for one field, your contracts for another field, things like that, so that you can refer back to it later on and you can find your information elegantly. You wouldn't want to just have like a big dump all the files in this field. You want to organize it as you would a folder system. It would just be different fields as opposed to kind of lumping into one folder. So that's the attachments field, checkbox, just like it's called. You can check mark things. You can run automations and filters off of these. And you can also, depending on your level, I have a pro account, so I see all these options. I think they are reduced options when you use a free or plus plan. So that is a checkbox. And then multiple select is just similar to a single select. You're just able to add multiple options. Again, multi-select is good for tagging attributes. So if you wanted to keep track of your clients and it's not something that you're necessarily going to action upon, but you just wanted to know like what their industry is, or if you're trying to keep track of their location, things like that. Things that you want to maybe sort on, but not necessarily report on, is a good thing that you would use multi-selects for. Collaborator, we already went over, as well as single select. Date, it just formats the date, and you can put a time field as well. And so you can put to 10, 22, and it timestamps for you. And you can edit, it just formats the date essentially, which is nice if you're trying to keep track of dates information. That's what the date's for. Phone number and email we went over. URL, just like we talked about. Files, putting either a website here or something like that, or a link to a Google Drive folder file would be great for asset management. And again, just structuring it so that you know what exactly that link is to is very important. Number, if you want to keep track of numbers, you can do decimals and integers. And you can pre-fill if you wanted to. You can also add negative numbers. And then you have precision. This is for if you just need to keep track of numbers, not based on a currency. Currency went over, percentage. Same thing. Very click happy today, I know. And then duration, if you want to keep track of durations, hours and minutes. Ratings, if you wanted to put stars on something, thumbs up, things like that for rating systems, you can definitely do that. A formula is just like an Excel formula. We can go into greater detail in another video about how to build out formulas, but basically you can take information within this table and either action on it, scrape it for data, or things like where I have this key field. I have the first name concatenated with the last name, concatenated with the company name. This allows you to kind of pull information together in one field, just like you would in an Excel document. Things to note, when you have a formula field, you cannot type into it. This one, for example, is driven by. You'll see that this field is getting driven by your other fields because of the formula. So like the company name doesn't exist. And now it does. And so you see a little bit of a lag time with formulas, but it's pretty straightforward. We went over that. Rollups allow you to keep track of information. Allows you to aggregate information from other linked records. So here we have a referral source. If we wanted to pull in information from this other table, we can roll that up. So I will show you on the other table how that looks, but let's just go through the rest of the fields on this screen. Count allows you to count the number of linked records. So here we have one linked record here, so you can count that. So again, if you're trying to keep track of the relation between two different pieces of information, because Airtable's a relational database, you can look at that one-to-many or many-to-many relationship between different records that are structured differently. So for example, this is a lead tracking database. I'm keeping track of the requests or the leads, and then the sources of the referral. So if somebody referred them to me, I can then connect that referral to the request so I can see how many people Irene Woodard referred to me. So this will be more important on the other table because this is a one-to-one relationship, whereas the other table, there's a one-to-many relationship. So lookup just allows you to pull up information from other tables. So for example, I can see Irene Woodard's email address from just having this lookup table. So I can look up information. when you have a lot of information in Airtable and anywhere else, you want to reduce the amount of copying and pasting you're doing from one table to another. And so it's really, really important to use lookups instead of necessarily copying the information through automations or having somebody physically copy information. It already exists in a structured manner in another table. So lookups allows you to reduce the amount of data entry that you're doing in your organization, because, and also between data entry, copying, and just the ability to lose information because you're copying things over. You could miss emails, you could miss information. And so this removes the ability for people to make mistakes. It reduces the human capital time, and it also just makes sure that your data kind of lives where it belongs and isn't just being moved for the sake of being moved. So a lookup is really helpful for that. Okay, and so whenever lookups created, auto numbers, just like you said, like you would assume, you're able to track the records as they come in. So this is the first record that ever came into this table. If you delete records, they will still exist. So if I got rid of number 48, 47, and 49 will still exist, but they will no longer be a number 48. So auto number isn't exactly the best tool to use, but it's a good way of kind of keeping track. A barcode allows you to have barcodes. I don't use them too much, but you can use a barcode reader if you wanted to. And a button. A button allows you to either open a URL, open a page designer, run a script. It allows you to do things within the apps of Airtable from clicking a button. So like we're just going to have open URL. So go to search, and you can use a formula. So here we're just going to put https google.com, and then we're going to type that in there. But you can also, if you knew like the search terms for Google as a URL, then you can go ahead and like put in the company name, for example. So pre-fills and URLs are pretty interesting once you start building them, but this is just a very simple button click. So that's really nice. The buttons are really nice and useful as you start to automate, as you start to build more capabilities in your Airtable, but they're also just a great place. Like, for example, if you captured your the company website of a lead, you could put that in here so that you just open it automatically. So you can refer to, let's say that we have company website. Okay. And so we're going to save that. And so you can change this to visit website, which is great if you're doing sales calls, for example. Company website. So you can see only one of these is highlighted because not everybody has a URL filled in, but I can click on this. And it will open the website that is linked here. So this is some, simple ways to use the fields in Airtable and kind of balance the information in a way that makes sense and structure it for automation and building out later on. But first, kind of looking at the data that you're trying to work with, making sure that you're breaking it into individual pieces is really, really important. And then also making sure that you are utilizing the fields in a way that makes the most sense for your data. So now that we've gone over the fields, you will start to see that you'll be using some more than others, and the formula fields are really helpful, but they're like a whole thing. So it's really important to kind of start from scratch and just look at organizing your data first and then going from there. So let's talk about different views. I'm going to move this over here. And then so the first thing you want to look at is sections. Sections allows you to organize your views in a way that if you have multiple people coming into your Airtable, it allows them to see their own personal views, or For example, you can have like your important views, your organization views, your automation views, things like that. So this is kind of like your big file folder for all your different views. You'll see here, I have an organization, I have an automation form, and then I have a view section, which I'm going to go ahead and delete. And here is my all leads. So basically I don't have anything hidden on this view. I can see all of my information. Sometimes if you're using filters and things like that, or you're hiding fields, the first thing I usually get is, I can't find my data. Where is it? It's usually because some fields are hidden or information is filtered. Again, making sure that you understand that the key field usually is a formula, or should be a formula, something that you're not going to touch all the time. You're not able to type into that. Is important to keep in mind when you're working with your data. And then also making sure that when you're in a view, that you're in a view that doesn't have any hidden fields or filters, if you want to make sure that you have all of your data in one place. I like to group information, and so you can group by statuses, you can group by pretty much anything. Statuses, request types, things like that are great. Those single selects are a great way to group. Also, you can group by states or cities, countries, things like that, depending on what kind of data that you're working with and how you're organizing things. So here we can see what status everyone's in that workflow. And then here, if you look at the top of the tables where there is a currency field, you will see that there's some basic math that can be done here. There's some average, median, min, max, all that fun stuff. So when you're grouping up those fields that have numbers or things that can be modeled, you can change them from the top here, and it will change here as well. So it's nice to be able to use kind of these little headers. You can also see what's unique, what's empty, what's fields, things like that. So it's very helpful to show what some of the information. So 33% of people that were booked were not referral sources, or you can see that 66.67% of the booked clients are referrals, so that you know that referrals are a good source of income for you and that you should be thanking your referrers. So those are some great ways to use the fields. You can sort by any of your fields, either alphanumeric or dates, things like that. Another thing I like to use is the colors. So you can color code your records, either by request type or a single select, or you can do it by condition. So if you wanted to color code where referral name or referral source contains Gloria, for example. Gloria. I can color code Gloria's referrals, right? And by color coding, you can see them on the far right. So you can organize your data and kind of at a glance see who's important to work with. Like, well, Gloria has a lot of people with the proposal out. She doesn't have any that are booked. So that's important to kind of be able to visualize your data without leaving the screen. So that's where color coding really helps. If you wanted to share your information, you can share it with a shared view. You just click on the shareable grid link, and people can view this information outside of your base. So one of the ways my clients like to use the shared views is to have like heads up displays in their shops if they're trying to keep track of their orders that are open, or if they need their team to kind of understand who to contact. If you needed a contact list of all of your employees, you could have a shared view where it's a small snippet of what's in your entire base, but maybe it is just the phone number and email address and first and last name and department for each of your team members without giving like that whole HR base to somebody. So they're just going to see exactly what you want them to see. So for example, if I wanted to hide, like I don't need their first and last name. So anything that I hide in this specific view will no longer exist here. So you can see it cut down the bit of information. And the linked records that are here in the base, they will not be able to click into because that is not shared. It would be shared in a different view, a different table. So it's very helpful. And then the person can still visualize and filter data, hide fields for their needs, and able to print if you want them to. And then you can also password protect or make sure that somebody has to be logged in with an email domain before they can see the data. So I'm going to go ahead and disable the share link. But that way you're able to kind of share the information without having somebody actually touch your data in Airtable. Sometimes you want to control who gets to touch stuff and who gets to look at stuff. Viewers and editors tend to be different people. So this is very helpful when you're trying to communicate with people outside of your organization information, or if you're just trying to communicate information to team members that you don't want actually touching information. So this is a grid view. And then there's also a form view. So if you wanted to get information into your Airtable, you can create a form. Here I have a contact form where I've hidden some of the information, like the status. I don't have a text capable number. I didn't assign it yet. Here's some notes, but the referral source, lifetime value, and things like that are not outside facing, but they are able to be people can get into your Airtable as a new record by filling in this form. My website has a contact form, so I use that to get people into my Airtable, to automate notifications and emails, and also keep track of leads so I know how I'm doing. So the form is a great way to get people to get information into your base without touching the information that's already there, so outside users, but it will create a new record on each time that you update this, every time somebody fills in that form. So it will not update the information that's already existing. So they can't edit a record that already exists. It will only create a new record. So it's a form view. Go ahead and delete this. And then we have a calendar view. So if there's dates in your table, you can keep track of the information. This is a little clunky because most of these leads are from August, but you can see if you wanted to know how long it took from the lead to the time that they actually booked or something like that, you can use start and end dates. Also, if you're tracking events, you can see where they fall on the calendar. You can share this view with a calendar. You can use it as a public link to your calendar so that you can see it within your Google Calendar or your Apple Calendar, things like that, but you're able to kind of allow people to yourself or someone else see what's going on a date-based view. Gallery, if you have a lot of pictures, so if you're keeping track of staffing or if you're keeping track of your inventory or things like that, or your events, you can always put pictures here and use them on the top of your card. So you would use that attachment field as your top of your card. And you can again colorize these. So you can see the little lines on the side if you wanted to colorize your cards. But this is just organized, and then you can sort it by first name or something like that. Or date they came in. So if you are a visual person and you don't like the big grids, you can always use this. And it still pulls open that expanded record view. You'll also see that all the edits, it's a little squirrely, but if you kind of hover just perfectly, you can see the edits to a table or to a record by looking at this activity. It will save a year's worth of information in the Pro. So comments, it will always save, but all these little edits that you made to a table, to a record, will only live for a year unless you have, I think, Enterprise. But it still allows you, so if I went back into Jennifer Jones Coaching, you can see her name changed, and then you can also see that I just touched those edits and who did it. So this is me. I'm green. So if you had multiple people, you could see their little bubbles, or if they had their pictures, you would see their picture. So you can personalize that experience as well. So the gallery is there. The Kanban, is also a very popular view. You will always see this uncategorized. So if there's nobody in that field, you want to hide it. Again, you can share this view, and then you can move people to different statuses and so forth. This is really great for when you have a single select to sort them by. So again, this is kind of like if you used Trello, this will give you a Trello look and gives you that kind of look to it. Timeline is one of my more, if you're trying to keep track of dates and so forth, this is a great tool. I think the Gantt is a little bit clunkier to use, but you can have a little bit more control over what shows up. So like in Gantt, you will always see the key field as the title of the record, whereas here you're able to customize a little bit more the records. You can customize the labels here, and then you can change the height and see what information you want to show on this view. So this is really nice, and you can again share this view. It's not printable. I will share on a different video how to print out a shared view so that you can see this on like one page. You can change the time scale, change years, things like that, and then group by statuses. So it's nice to see kind of your information, especially if you're dealing with a lot of dates, if you're dealing with projects, start and end dates, things like that. This is great for project management planning and being able to kind of visualize your data in one place. And the last one is a Gantt view. So again, I'm going to group them by status. So I will show you the difference between a Gantt view and a timeline view. Start request date. And we'll just use request date as the end just because. And then you can see dependencies if you wanted to. So for Gantt, you could see if something was due waiting on somebody else or a task, you would do it that way. And so then I want to group this by status. You can see it's a little bit easier to see a lot of information at once, but it's not as customizable. So like the other one, you're able to kind of be able to see what information you want at the top. Like, so this one is first name, last name, company name. So if that works for you, that's great. But if you save your information differently, then you will have less flexibility to show that information. Okay, so those are the fields, and then let's go over a linked record relationship. So I have another table where I keep track of my referrals. And basically this is a high, medium. So here's the name of the referral, the person who refers business to me, for example. And I have their first and last name, the email address where we pay out, the created date, the leads that they have generated for me, the current referral value, which is a roll-up. So basically, I take the lifetime value of those leads and I sum them. This is my aggregation formula. I just sum them and say, okay, here are the 5 people that Yoshio has referred to me that have booked and have a lifetime value. That's a total of $15,500. I can then take that number, that lifetime number, and average it. So if you look, you can see the averages, counts, count-alls, min, max, things like that. So as you're modeling data, you might find that you need different views, but this is really important to have some math on those numbers that is from linked records. So if I take Eric, for example, and I change his referral source from Yoshio to Astra, you'll see that he was a very valuable customer and it dropped Yoshio's referral value, right? I can also see the rate of referral, like how much they're going to make. So I can multiply that referral value that they've created, and I multiply it by the referral rate. So I can take the value, multiply by the rate. That's how much they've earned. I then can manually add in the page date. And then the formula here is how much they've earned minus how much I've paid. That's how much I still have outstanding. So I've created a view where I only say that I want to look at the number of referrals that I have not paid yet. So I can see these sums here. Here's the total referral value. Here's the average referral value. Here is, I'm going to change this to average referral rate, how much has been earned to date, how much I've paid, and then of course, how much I owe. So this allows me to have that relationship between the booked lead and the referrer, and then also be able to model some of that data and really get into the benefits of having a linked database where the information needs to flow from one place to another, because I'm using roll-ups and things like that. So some other things that you can keep in mind when you're using Airtable and looking at your tables. The tables are across the top. You can think of them as Excel or Google spreadsheet tabs, and they're discrete information. So like the requests are going to be held somewhere differently than referral sources. So for example, if you're trying to keep track of multiple people within an organization. So you have companies that you work with, but you also work with different sectors. You will have a company table, and then you'll have a contact table. You might also have a third table, which is the deals that you're doing, so that you can keep track of the deals against the individual company representatives that you're working with, and then also see what the value of the entire company is. So structuring your data as different pieces of information, you could still roll all of that up into the company information, roll it down into the different business sectors that you're working with, and then looking at each deal individually. Things that you will also see is the trash. You can see what you threw out. You can also, Control Z is the ultimate, I messed up. Redo is Control Shift Z. You can also take snapshots of your data, and you also can show the history in your expanded records, meaning that you can see all those little edits. Automation sometimes is popped open. This will close your screen a little bit. So if it's something that you're not working with right now, you can always click on this X. You can also expand out your automation so that you're only focusing on those pieces of information. And then apps as well. If your screen gets too small, you can always close things. Here's where all your apps on your base live. You can see I have a pro account, so I'm able to search across the entire database. I have a card here where I'm able to keep track of all the values of the leads. It's a little summary, things like that. I can import information, and I can keep track of the value of referrals and so forth. I can also expand out the screen and move things around. So it's very helpful to kind of isolate your information and open up your dashboards when you need to, and then close when you don't. If your views take up too much of your space, you can always close them down. But this gives you can click here to see all your tables, add more tables, and you can open up the views if necessary. Settings for views. Also, you can make something a collaborative view, meaning people can come in. Anybody who's in your base who's not logged in as you can adjust filters, hide things like that. So if you want something to be always a certain way, make sure that you're using it as a personal view. Or if you're using automations, or you really depend on things not being edited all, like you want to make sure that you're not doing anything wrong. You can lock the view, and then it will give you a warning sign before you unlock the view. So it's really helpful to be able to set the editing ability of the view, of the layout, and so forth. That really just makes your life a little bit easier. And then, that's it. So if you're interested in this space particularly, I do have it on my store, which is store.growwithjen.com. If you need help structuring your business, reducing human capital, and leveraging automation, check out my website, growwithjen.com. And I have a ton more content planned. Thank you for sticking around for 40 minutes. I think that this was a great deep dive into the fields and the views, and there's plenty more to talk about in Airtables. So thanks so much for your time.